time, a widower lived alone in a hut with his young daughter Natasha. The two of them were happy together, and they would smile at each other over a table piled with bread and jam. Their favorite game was to play peekaboo, first this side of the samovar, and then that. Everything was well until the man decided he wanted to marry again. So Natasha gained a stepmother, and after that everything changed. No more bread and jam on the table, no more playing peekaboo around the samovar with her father at tea. Eventually, her stepmother forbade her from sitting for tea at all, saying little girls shouldn't have tea, and even took away her bread with jam. She would throw the girl a crust of bread, and instead tell her to go out of their home and find someplace else to eat. The stepmother would gossip on with her new husband, and tell him that everything that went wrong in the house was the girl's fault. And eventually, the father believed his wife. So poor Natasha would go by herself into the shed in their yard, the dry crust wet with tears, and eat all alone. She could hear the stepmother yelling at her to come in and wash up the tea things, tidy the house, brush the floor, and clean everybody's muddy boots. Though Natasha obeyed dutifully, the stepmother decided she could not bear the sight of Natasha any longer. A wicked thought wormed itself into her mind. She remembered her sister, the terrible witch Baba Yaga, the bony-legged one who lived in the forest, and she began her awful plan. The next morning, Natasha's father left to visit friends in a nearby village. As soon as Natasha's father was out of sight, the wicked stepmother called out for her. "You are to go today to my sister, your dear little aunt who lives in the forest. You will ask her for a needle and thread to mend a shirt." "But here is a needle and thread," said Natasha, trembling, for she knew that her aunt was Baba Yaga, the witch, and that any child who came near her was never seen again. "Hold your tongue!" snapped the stepmother, and she gnashed her teeth, which made a noise like clattering tongs. "Didn't you hear what I said? You'll go to your dear little aunt to get a needle and thread." "How will I find her?" Natasha's voice trembled, for she had heard that Baba Yaga chased her victims through the air in a giant mortar and pestle, and that she had iron teeth with which she ate children. The stepmother reached out and took hold of the little girl's nose, pinching it hard. "Do you feel that?" she said. "Yes," whispered the girl. "Follow the road into the forest until you come to a fallen tree. Then turn to your left and follow your nose until you find your auntie. Now off with you, lazy one." She shoved a handkerchief in the girl's hand, packing only a few morsels of stale bread and cheese and some scraps of meat. Natasha took a few steps onto the road and looked back. Her stepmother stood at the door with her arms crossed, glaring at her. So she reluctantly continued on. She walked the road through the forest until she found the fallen tree and turned to her left. Her nose was still hurting where her stepmother had pinched it, so she knew this was the right way. Finally, she stumbled upon Baba Yaga's hut, the bony-legged one, the witch. Around the hut was a high fence, rusted and dilapidated. When Natasha pushed the gates open, they squeaked miserably, as if it hurt for them to move. On the ground, Natasha noticed a rusty oil can. "How lucky," she said, as she saw some oil was left in it, and she poured the remaining drops of oil onto the hinges of the gates. Inside the gates was Baba Yaga's hut, unlike any she'd ever seen, for it stood on giant hen's legs and walked around the yard. As Natasha approached, the house turned around to face her, and it seemed its front windows were like eyes and its door a mouth. A servant of the witch was standing in the yard, crying bitterly because of the task Baba Yaga had set her to do, and was wiping her eyes on her petticoat. "How lucky that I have a handkerchief," Natasha said as she untied it, shook it clean, and carefully put the few morsels of food she had in her pockets. She gave the handkerchief to the servant, who wiped her eyes on it and smiled through her tears. As Natasha continued to the hut, beside it was a huge dog, but very thin, gnawing on an old bone. "How lucky that I have some bread and meat," Natasha said as she reached into her pocket for the scraps of food. To the dog, she apologized sweetly. "I'm afraid it's rather stale, but it's better than nothing, I'm sure." And the dog gobbled it all, licking his lips. Natasha reached the mouth of the hut and tapped on the door, trembling as she did. "Come in," squeaked the wicked voice of the witch. The little girl stepped inside, and there, weaving at the loom, sat Baba Yaga, the bony-legged one, the witch, and in the corner of the hut, a thin black cat watching a mouse hole. "Good day to you, auntie," the little girl said, attempting to not sound as afraid as she was. "Good day to you, niece," said Baba Yaga. "My stepmother has sent me to you to ask for a needle and thread to mend a shirt." Has she now? Baba Yaga smiled wickedly, flashing her iron teeth, for she knew how much her sister hated her stepdaughter. Sit down here at the loom and continue my weaving. I must fetch you the needle and thread. The little girl obeyed and sat down at the loom, beginning to weave. Baba Yaga whispered to her servant, Listen to me. Make the bath very hot and scrub my niece. Scrub her clean. I'll make a dainty meal of her, I will. As the servant came in for the jug to gather the bath water in, Natasha pleaded with her. I beg you, please don't be quick in stoking the fire, and carry the water for the bath in a sieve with holes so the water will run through. The servant said nothing, but indeed she took a very long time getting the bath ready. Baba Yaga came to the window, and her sweetest voice, Are you weaving, my little niece? Are you weaving, my pretty? I'm weaving, Auntie, Natasha confirmed. When Baba Yaga went away from the window, the little girl spoke to the thin black cat who was watching the mouse hole. What are you doing? Watching for a mouse, replied the thin black cat. I haven't had any dinner in 3 days. How lucky that I have some cheese left. And she gave her cheese to the thin black cat, who gobbled it up. The cat considered her with a tilted head, then spoke up. Little girl, do you want to get out of here? Oh, Kitty, dear, I do. I fear that Baba Yaga will try to eat me with her iron teeth. That is exactly what she intends to do, said the cat. But I know how to help you. At that moment, Baba Yaga came to the window. Are you weaving, my little niece? Are you weaving, my pretty? I am weaving, Auntie, said Natasha, working away while the loom went clickety-clack, clickety-clack. Baba Yaga went out again. The thin black cat then whispered to Natasha, There is a comb on the stool, and there is a towel brought for your bath. You must take them both and run for it while Baba Yaga is still in the bathhouse. She will chase after you, and when she does, you must throw the towel behind you, and it will turn into a big, wide river. It will take her a little time to get over that. When she gets over the river, you must throw the comb behind you. The comb will sprout up into such a thick forest she won't be able to get through it all. But she'll hear the loom stop and know that I'm gone. Don't worry, I'll take care of that, said the thin black cat, and took her place at the loom. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack. The loom never stopped for a moment. Natasha peered out the window to see if Baba Yaga was still in the bathhouse, and then jumped out of the hut. The big dog leapt up to tear her to pieces, but just as he was going to spring on her, he saw who she was. Why, this is the little girl who gave me the bread and meat, said the dog. A good journey to you, little girl. And he lay back down with his head between his paws. She petted his head, scratched his ears, before sneaking over to the gates. They opened quietly without making any noise at all because of the oil she had poured on their hinges before. Then she ran as fast as her little legs could take her. Meanwhile, the thin black cat still sat at the loom. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, sang the loom. But you never saw such a tangle of yarn as the tangle made by that thin black cat. Once more, Baba Yaga came to the window. Are you weaving, my little niece? Are you weaving, my pretty? I am weaving, Auntie, said the black cat, tangling and tangling the yarn, while the loom went clickety-clack, clickety-clack. That's not the voice of my little dinner, said Baba Yaga as she jumped into the hut, gnashing her iron teeth as she saw the smug black cat at the loom, tangling and tangling the threads. Baba Yaga shrieked and jumped at the cat. Why didn't you scratch the little girl's eyes out? The cat curled up its tails and arched its back. In all the years that I have served you, you have given me only water and made me hunt for my dinner. The girl gave me real cheese. Enraged, Baba Yaga grabbed the cat and shook her. Turning to the servant girl, she gripped her by the collar and snarled. Why did you take so long to prepare the bath? Trembled the servant. In all the years I've served you, you have never so much as given me a rag. But the girl gave me a pretty handkerchief. Baba Yaga cursed her and dashed out into the yard. Seeing the gates wide open, she shrieked, Gates! Why didn't you squeak when she opened you? Said the gates. In all the years we've served you, you've never so much as sprinkled a drop of oil on us, and we could hardly stand the sound of our own creaking. But the girl oiled us, and now we swing back and forth without a sound. Baba Yaga slammed the gates closed. Spinning around, she pointed her long, crooked finger at the dog. You, she hollered. Why didn't you tear her to pieces when she ran out of the house? said the dog. "In all the years I've served you, you have never thrown me anything but an old bone. But the girl gave me real meat and bread." Baba Yaga rushed around the yard, cursing and hitting them all while screaming at the top of her voice. Then she jumped into her giant mortar. Beating the mortar with the giant pestle to make it go faster, she flew off into the air. There, on the ground far ahead, she soon spied the girl running through the trees, stumbling and fearfully looking over her shoulder. "You'll never escape me!" Baba Yaga laughed a terrible laugh and steered her flying mortar straight down towards the girl, quickly closing in on her. Natasha was running faster than she had ever run before, yet still she could hear Baba Yaga's mortar bumping on the ground behind her. Desperately, she remembered the black cat's words and threw the towel behind her on the ground. As promised, the towel grew bigger and bigger and wetter, and soon a deep, broad river stood between the little girl and Baba Yaga. Natasha never stopped running. When Baba Yaga reached the edge of the river, she screamed louder than ever and threw her pestle on the ground, as she knew she couldn't fly over an enchanted river. In a rage, she flew back to her hut on hen's legs. There, she gathered all her cows and drove them to the river. "Drink! Drink!" she screamed at them, and the cows drank up the river to the last drop. Then Baba Yaga hopped into her giant mortar again and flew over the dry bed of the river to pursue her prey. Natasha had run on quite a distance ahead, and as soon as she thought she might, at last, be free of the terrible Baba Yaga, her heart froze over in terror when she saw the dark figure in the sky speeding toward her again. "This is the end for me," she despaired. Then she suddenly remembered what the cat had said about the comb. She threw the comb behind her, and as promised it grew bigger and bigger, and its teeth sprouted up into a thick forest, so thick that not even Baba Yaga could force her way through. And Baba Yaga, the witch, the bony-legged one, gnashing her teeth and screaming with rage and disappointment, finally turned round and flew back to her little hut on hen's legs. The exhausted girl finally arrived back home. She was afraid to go inside and see her mean stepmother, so instead she waited outside in the shed. When she saw her father pass by, she ran out to him. "Where have you been?" cried her father. "And why is your face so red?" The stepmother turned yellow when she saw the girl, and her eyes glowed and her teeth ground together until they broke. But Natasha was not afraid, and she went to her father and climbed on his knee and told him everything as it had happened. When the father learned that the stepmother had sent his daughter to be eaten by Baba Yaga, the witch, he was so furious that he drove her out of the hut and never let her return. From then on, he took good care of his daughter by himself and never again let a stranger come between them. Over a table piled high with bread and jam, father and daughter would play peekaboo back and forth behind the samovar, and the two of them lived happily ever after. Baba Yaga is one of the more memorable characters from Eastern European folklore. She's both ambiguous in both her villainy and her heroism, sometimes hindering and sometimes helping the characters of folklore. She is altogether enigmatic. Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing, as I do intend to make more content like this in the future.